gentlemen. Next up we have Brad Pickard from Cornell University. So over to you, Brad.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Is this works okay? Okay. So, thank you for coming at this coveted after lunch time slot. I've done a lot of work on food waste and thinking about how different date labels might affect food consumption and thus food waste. And today I have some new research that I'd like to present to you. It's still a work in process, but here I'm trying to tie the effect of different date labeling strategies to food consumption and food waste, and then the types of foods that are consumed or wasted as a result of these different date labeling strategies. And if I lose you somewhere along the way, there are some date labeling strategies that seem to affect food consumption and food waste. And there's some of these date labeling strategies that seem to affect food consumption and food waste in certain food categories more than others. And so there are some date labeling strategies that might affect food waste and might do it in a way that leads society to making better food choices. Okay? That's the short version. So let's see if this all works. So probably many of you know this, the food waste is a big topic. There's a lot of food that's wasted. If you look at the food that's wasted by consumers and retailers, most of this is actually wasted by consumers, not retailers. It's a big number. The USDA, the economic unit within the USDA, has assessed this at $162 billion per year. Those top wasted categories in terms of value are meat, vegetables, dairy, and fruit. It's a slightly different story when you look at the top foods that are wasted in terms of quantities, and then it's yet another story when you look at the top foods that are wasted in terms of calories. Okay? And this is important to keep in mind. Yeah, so here it just breaks down that $162 billion per year, and it shows you the pounds and the percent of the total that comes in these different food categories. Maybe that last column on your right is the one to be looking at. That shows the percent of food that is wasted by retailers and consumers in these different food categories. You go down, 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 those numbers kind of are around 30%, which is a number that we often hear. 30%, 40% of food is wasted in the United States. Some more food categories. So, food waste. Food waste, I don't think I need to remind you, but food waste is associated with environmental problems, right? Food waste, we send food to the landfill. That could have environmental implications. And then we use a lot of resources to produce food, and if that food isn't consumed, then those could be thought of as wasted. That's another sort of environmental issue. There's food security issues because there's 17% of households in the United States that are food insecure in some capacity, and so some of this food waste could be better utilized among that population. That represents a food security issue. And then there are some health concerns related to food waste, and this is the topic. You can see other people have been thinking and writing about these, and it's this third issue that I want to spend more time thinking about today. The government is toying around with different ideas. How can we influence, how can we reduce food waste? You know, can we tax producers of waste? Can we have some sort of bans like they've proposed in Vermont where they are trying to shift towards a zero food waste policy? You could try to subsidize the proper diversion of waste, and there's different municipal and state level initiatives that are moving down this path. And then the government could influence the information that's given to people to help them make better choices about food waste. And when people propose that we change date labels or harmonize date labels, this is the information that's on a package, whether it's a use by or a best by or a fresh by or a sell by or better if used by. There's a lot of thought that these labels are confusing and that this leads to a substantial amount of food waste. And if you could change or harmonize that information, that would be a policy initiative that might be able to affect the quantity, the value of food waste. So just a couple more words on this zero food waste. In general, economists like me are not so keen on zero food waste. It's, I think generally we think this is a very expensive proposition, and it's subject to a lot of potential problems, right? It could lead to, if you have some zero food waste initiative and people respond to that by flushing food down their toilet, you're creating another problem in society, right? So there could be a lot of, that's one example of an unintended consequence of a zero food waste policy. Also, I think most economists would argue that there are potentially some benefits of some food waste, maybe not to the order of magnitude that we see in society today, but there might be some benefits to have it. If you're going to throw a party, if you're going to host a lunch, you don't want to run out of food, right? Running out of food may have a greater cost than the cost of discarding the extra food. Okay? Zero food waste might not necessarily be the right idea, but perhaps the amount of food waste that we're observing in society is too high. I think you could succinctly think that there are some trade-offs associated with food waste, and that there's a value to time, there's a value to this convenience, and I'm going to argue today that there might even be some nutritional benefits of wasting food. Okay? And this is a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, who wrote a really nice op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal not so long ago, and he had this, he's better at having these succinct, catchy one-liners, and I think this is a really nice way to set this zero food waste as maybe not the optimal way to proceed. Maybe thinking about some of the other policy solutions. So, I think I showed you some numbers on the value of food waste. I showed you some numbers on the quantity of food waste. This is a pie chart that shows across all these different food categories where the money that is being wasted. And you can see meat, dairy, vegetables, and fruit are the main categories where food is being wasted in terms of dollars. Are you ready? So this next slide is not money, but it's calories. And it tells you quite a different story. The calories that are being wasted, it's not fruit and vegetables and dairy and meat. There's still some calories that are being wasted in those categories, but the lion's share of calories that we're wasting in this country are in the form of added fats and added sugar, right? So if anything, we seem to be wasting, in terms of calories, we seem to be wasting those things that perhaps aren't as good for us as some of the other food categories. So if we're wasting food, at least, not in total, but at least half of that waste is in the form of added fats and added sugars. And I'm just showing you this because any policy initiative that reduces food waste, I think we want to disproportionately reduce food waste such that we're targeting these areas. Right? So when we're thinking about reductions in food waste, different policies are going to have different effects on the value of different food categories, and different policies might have different effects on the calories. And I'm actually going to go one step further, and I'm going to think about all these different food groups. They all have calories, but they're all comprised of different macro and micronutrients as well, right? And so different initiatives to reduce food waste might have very different implications in terms of overall intake of carbohydrates, sugars, proteins, fiber, and then the various micronutrients, the various nutrients, minerals, and vitamins. Okay? Each of these categories is comprised of a different basket of those macro and micronutrients. So here is a series of questions that I'm asking myself and that I'm trying to address in this research project. And I'm really going back to these date labels. I talked about this earlier, these different ways of presenting information on food, the best by, the use by, the fresh by, the sell by, the expires on, these different ways that food, and in the United States, there's really very little regulation on who and what and how you use these labels. I think the only standard label, the only place where there's regulation on these labels is for infant formula. There's a few states that have some regulations on as they pertain to certain meat products, but by and large, it's the Wild West out there. You can use whatever expression you want on your food product. And if you go to the yogurt aisle, for instance, some food manufacturers will use the use by language, some will use the fresh by, some will use the best before. It's up to the manufacturer to decide and how they want to, what they think that information means for the reputation of their product and how consumers will respond to that. But there's proposed legislation to try to harmonize this wording on food products in the United States and elsewhere. So, how do these date labels, how do consumers respond to these date labels? Do they affect our consumption and our waste? And the important thing here, for me anyways, is do these date labels affect different food categories differently? So does a use by label on yogurt have the same impact on consumption and waste as does a use by sticker on breakfast cereal, for instance? Okay? The answer is generally no. Different products respond in different ways to this type of information. I think a lot of this is due to the riskiness. I think some of these labels have a connotation of food safety, and some of these labels are really more about food quality. And certain food categories have a history, have a relationship where one of these is a more important attribute for certain food products, food safety or food quality. So it's really, I'm not sure if riskiness is the right word, but it's some relationship between the food product and food safety or food quality. And the real question I'm trying to ask myself is, if we were to change date labels, how would that affect food waste, food consumption across different products? And what kind of effects would those ultimately have on the food that we consume and the nutrients that we consume of those products? Some of those food products are much healthier than other food products. So if we could design, so policymakers are thinking about changing date labels on food. And my question is, if they adopt one label, it might reduce food waste, but it might not have any real health implications. But if they were to adopt a different label, it might have a slightly smaller impact on food waste, but it could have benefits in the form of the healthiness of the products that we ultimately eat. And so I'm trying to highlight that there's a trade-off between policymakers that are interested in food waste and policy decisions that affect healthy eating. And those could not be the exact same outcome for a particular label. Okay, so I have, and a co-author of mine, a friend of mine who works at Tufts University in Boston, we've been conducting a lot of experiments and surveys trying to figure out what people waste, right? And how do we measure what they waste? And we think we're getting closer, and so now we're trying to ask, and how much would you waste differently if there was a different label on that food product? We do this in a way such that we ask people, how much of this food are you likely to purchase? How much of this food are you likely to consume in your household, assuming that you're there in front of your refrigerator? And we do this with different dates. We do this with different date labeling, different words on those labels. We generally only expose one person to one date label, and then we make comparisons across people that are otherwise very similar, but are exposed to a different label, to try to get a better understanding of the effect of that label on their consumption and waste patterns. We have done this with, I think we've probably done this with thousands of people now across different products, different food products, and across different date labels. So here is a summary of one that we did with cereal, yogurt, and salad greens under different labels. So we had the use by, the fresh by, the sell by, and the best by. You don't need to know all of the details, but we also did this with a large and a small package size to see if the package size also influences the amount of waste. And it does. Maybe not surprisingly, but the package size, sort of this Costco supersize effect, and there is an effect on the size of the product. Bigger products tend to have less consumption, more waste as a percent of the total. So here is a diagram that shows, summarizes some of the results across these different labels across these different packages. And here I think I aggregate the small size and the large size together. But you can see, I think I can see, in general, I am seeing a story where the blue bar seems to be the tallest. And the tallest means that there is a greater expectancy of food waste. So when you present people with a use by sticker, the level of food waste, the inferred level of food waste goes up. When you use Best Buy, perhaps, the green bar is always, in a statistically significant way, lower than the blue bar. The exception was cereal, but it's not statistically different. And to be honest, I'm most interested in products like salad. I've become more interested in products like salad and yogurt because that is probably, those are the products where these date labels actually influence consumption decisions in the home. Right? These are products that are more perishable. So there's this general idea here that date labels that are more about food safety lead to more food waste relative to labels that are more about food quality. That's, I think, as a take-home message here. Here's another example of another survey we did. Here we have a lot more products. We have 10 products that I've listed here at the bottom, including salad greens, yogurt, not breakfast cereal, but we also have some beverages in the mix. We have bread in the mix. And here, again, we were asking people to describe the level of food waste across these 10 products under different date labeling approaches. I spent last year on a sabbatic in Europe, and in Europe, in the UK, this is true. I was based in France, and this was even more true in France. There is a lot of food that is packaged that includes a quality date and a safety date. Okay, so it's a package of, I don't know, can you imagine deli meat is a good example? And on that package, it'll tell you that this is best by a certain date. They're promising food quality by a certain date. And on the same label, they're showing use by. They're giving you the, if you will, full information. They're giving you information about the food safety and about the food quality. So we included this in a subsequent analysis. We included this treatment in addition to best by on itself, use by on itself. The other thing I noticed in Europe is there's a surprising number of products, perishable products, that have a little biosensor, a little sticker on them, and it signals the freshness of the product on the other side of the cellophane. This seems to be increasingly popular among one of the chains that I visited in the UK. I'm just looking at you, Tim, because you're from the UK. And there's also a chain in France, the Auchan Group, that I think is affiliated with Carrefour, that also is using this on meats, but they're also using it on, there's a lot more fruits and vegetables that are packaged in Europe in general. You don't see as much of this sort of farm stand style of, and there's this biosensor wheels, I call them, freshness wheels on a lot of products. I don't think it's Tesco, I think it's the Sainsbury group that does this. We did this with this group of products. I think this is an example. I'm not sure where this food product is from, but it's an example of that freshness wheel on a packaged pear or apple product in the corner of my screen. And here you can see that the amount of waste, again, depends on the date label that we use, whether it's best by, use by. And I think there's a lot of bars and a lot of colors, but I am showing you this chart mostly because I want to impress upon you that different date labels have different rank order of which of these treatments has the biggest effect on waste or consumption, and it depends from one product category to the next. Different food products are responding in different ways to these treatments, to these information packages. And I think that's really important. Okay? So it's pretty noisy set of stacked bars here, but the takeaway message is that different products are responding differently to these date labels, right? If you're interested in reducing food waste, you almost need to have different labels by food product category because they all seem to respond in different ways. And I think this is important. So what I am doing, and what I want to show you is an approach that we've taken. It seems a little black box-ish, it seems a little complicated, but what we're ultimately doing is thinking about all of the food products that are available to you and I as consumers. Okay? All of the thousands of food products that are available to us as food consumers. And I'm also including food that we eat at home and food that we eat away from home. Okay? And I'm aggregating those into 9 food categories. So these are things like eggs, right? But eggs is the tidiest category that I have, right? Because the things that are in eggs is mostly eggs. But I also have another category called fruits, which includes a lot of different fruits. I have another category that's alcohol, that has all the different types of alcohol in there. I have another category that's called other foods, which includes everything that's not in my other 8 categories. Okay? And for each of these 9 food categories, I have a nutrient profile that describes the average nutrient profile for that food group. Okay? And then what I do in this system is I tell this system that the government is going to implement some date labeling strategy that is going to have an effect on each of these different food categories. People, as a result of that date labeling strategy, people are going to change their food consumption and their food waste patterns based on what we've observed in our surveys and in our various experiments. And it's going to be different depending on which food categories, different food categories respond differently to these different date labeling approaches. Okay? That is going to lead to a change in the quantities and the prices of all these different food categories. And then you can see from the changes in the quantities of the foods that consumers are going to choose as a result of this change in the policy environment. It's a good place for a gentle nod. This is mostly following. Yeah? Good. Thank you. It always makes me feel it's difficult to explain. That is going to have an effect on the calories that we consume, and it's going to have an effect on the nutrients that we consume. So you see, this is kind of like a make-believe, this is a what-if scenario. What if the government changes the date labeling in general? How is that going to affect what we waste and what we consume across these 9 different food categories? And ultimately, how is that going to affect human health? How is that going to affect what we eat? How is that going to affect the amount of protein versus the amount of fat that we eat? Okay? So here are some results. I know this is a lot of numbers, and I'm not even sure I want you to focus on all these little numbers, but what I do want you to see is that these are my 9 different, those columns are my 9 different food categories. Okay? And in the end is a sum across those 9 food categories. Gentle nod, that makes sense? And then as we go down, we have all of the major macronutrients up top, and then all of the major micronutrients down below. Okay? But I think it's okay to focus for now just on this top row. The changes in calories as a result of a policy, and in this case, this is a policy that is aiming towards a zero food waste initiative. So here we are systematically trying to decrease food waste across all 9 food categories, right? And do you see what's happening here? Do you see what's happening here? There is an increase in the total caloric consumption, a big increase at the end. That is the number of calories per person per year as a result of an initiative that tries to systematically reduce food waste across the board. People are going to eat more. People are going to eat more, and you can see that the half of that additional consumption comes in this area called other food. Okay? And you know what's the main thing in other food? you don't know because I created this, but you can imagine what's in that other food category? Is it good things or not so good things? It's not so good things. That is largely the added fats and added sugars are in that category called other food. And if you have a zero food waste policy, what you're doing is you are rearranging someone's diet, you're rearranging society's diet, and you're disproportionately shifting calories into this other food because that's where a lot of calories are currently being wasted. And if you shift towards a zero food waste, you are disproportionately shifting calories back into that area. And I would argue that that is a great policy if you're interested in food waste, but it's not such a good policy if you are mindful that this policy change will have some disruption somewhere else, and in this case, in human health consequences. But I'm going to show, there's that number I wanted to highlight with my box. Does that make sense? So now what I want to do is I want to show you some other things we're doing. This is another what-if scenario. But in this scenario, I'm not systematically moving towards zero food waste. In this one, we're relabeling everything in the grocery store with a Best Buy label. Everything gets the food quality label. It's a law that says you're not allowed to use these other labels. Everyone has to use the Best Buy label. Okay? And in this case, you can see that other food, remember other food? That's the healthy or the unhealthy food category? That's the unhealthy. And can you see what's going on now? That the unhealthy food category is still increasing, but it's increasing far less than it was in the previous one. So by having Best Buy date labels imposed rather than systematically shifting towards zero food waste, you are, for one thing, you see a much smaller increase in total calories in the far right-hand corner, top right-hand corner. You see a number that's a 9,000 rather than a 50,000. So you see less total calories being consumed. You have less food waste. You don't have as much food waste as you did in my previous table, but now you're starting to appreciate that there are some trade-offs between having less food waste and some of these nutritional. And I think for those of us who are interested in fruits and vegetables, you do see that in this scenario, those fruits and vegetables that are packaged and that do have this type of date labeling information presented on them, if it was presented in a way that used the language Best Buy rather than other types of languages, you would see an increase of fruits and vegetables. And this number, 5,000 calories, is smaller than this number, 8,000, but relatively it's still an impressive. It's not off by a magnitude as we see with some of these other. I think the other thing you'll notice here in the zero food waste is you see a much higher proportion of meat being consumed. All of these food products, you can imagine, all substitute with each other, and we're trying to capture all those different substitution effects inside this model. And I'm just going to give you one more. This is, you'll see here there's a negative change in meat. This is the last one I'm going to show you. And this might be, to me, this is the most interesting. This is the policy that if the government says all food products across the board need to have both a food safety and a food quality stamp on the same food product. This is this label that I observed in Europe where you had the Best Buy and the Use By harmonized across all food products. You can see here that the net change in calories in this case is only 2,300 calories per person per year. And then as you look across here, you see that the change in fruits and vegetables has the largest caloric change in a positive way. I'm not sure which one of these buttons is my laser. This number is the biggest number. And you can see that there is some negative numbers in the mix too. So moving towards this policy regime would have a negative effect on consumption, calories of cereal and this other food category and the food away from home, and it would have the biggest gain in the consumption or in the calories consumed of fruits and vegetables. And for those of you who have an interest in specific nutrients, you can see as you go through this list of nutrients that in general this is the most favorable outcome in terms of some of those key micronutrients that obviously linked to the fruit and vegetable category, one of my 9 categories. Does that make sense? I'm not sure what I want to emphasize. I just want to emphasize most that this debate about food waste, I think it's important, but I think it's also important to just sort of house it in a larger discussion about what we're eating. And I think that just having this narrow focus on food waste, you might be missing out on some of the other implications and some of the unintended consequences of such a focused, targeted policy approach. And I think, do I say this? I do want to say that I think the more of these surveys and the more of these experiments I do, I'm convinced that the words on the package matter. I don't think they matter to everybody, but I think they matter enough to enough people that they actually do affect. I'm not convinced that it affects what we buy in the grocery store, but I think it affects what we do at home in the pantry or when we open the fridge. Not for everybody, but for some people. So I think taking a really hard, close look at what words are on food products, I think it matters. And I think having some harmonization is a worthwhile discussion, harmonizing those words across food manufacturers, across food categories. I'm pretty certain that moving towards a zero food waste is a bad idea on many fronts, and I think nutritionally, I think it sort of adds more weight that this is not a good policy approach, especially if you're interested in what we eat and what different food categories we're eating. I think it has some implications. I think that if we're interested in both of these objectives, that moving towards a date labeling approach that focuses on food quality, so if it's a Best By label, or I think even better, a combination that has both a food quality and a food safety information on the same date label, is probably a more optimal way to proceed. I think it has some implications of some reduction in food waste, but it also has some implication on steering people towards eating foods that are better for us, including fruits and vegetables and dairy products. There's a little tiny picture of us in the lab. This is how we conduct this work and how we collect the data. And then I was at the USDA and I saw this poster. Maybe John recognizes this. Is like 100 years old, this poster at the USDA. And these sort of ideas that we talk about, we write about, we're not, people have been thinking about these for a long time. And then it's not even a numbered point, right? It's just at the bottom of the sign. It's reminding us not to waste food. It's sort of set in a different time and with a different sort of thought process, but this is not a new idea. So if you, and yeah, I think you can find that poster on the internet. I think my time is done. If you have any questions, I am happy to chat with you. But sometimes when I sit there and I don't really have questions at the end, or I'm tired, or I want to go get something to eat, that's fine too. You can always send me a note, and it's always fun to continue the conversation later also. Thank you for your attention.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
So, Brad, in your simulation of zero food waste, are you talking about reductions in farm-level food waste, or consumer and household food waste, or what's going on there, and what's driving the changes?
Good. So that's a good question. So John was asking me, when I simulate this story with zero food waste, is that zero food waste at the production, at the farm, at the field level, or is that zero food waste by retailers or by consumers? That's a good question. We can model any of those. Our simulation model in the background has farm-level sectors with 11 different agricultural commodities that then get pulled into 9 different food products and beverages that you and I eat based on different cost shares. But the results I showed you would be it's moving towards consumer food waste. So it's food waste among the 7 of those 9 that are foods that we eat at home. So it's not food away from home, and it's not alcohol. I think having zero alcohol waste is another. I think that's another question. I don't want to get into that debate, but that's a good question.
Hi. Oh, sorry. Krista from City Harvest. I'm curious what role socioeconomic conditions of consumers played in your research.
That is a very good question. So I can give you the long answer, but I'm trying to think of something more concise. But it's very important. And so when we do this experiment work and this survey work, and we try to see how people respond to these different date labels, and I show you those bars. Sometimes I'll show you a bar, and then I'll show you the 95% confidence interval around that bar. So that is a reflection that bar, that raised colored bar, is the average effect. But within that, we can identify a range of effects. And in this model, where I present these results, I'm presenting to you the mean result. But I could also show you, and in a more academic paper, I would show that mean result plus some confidence interval around that. That will very much address that question that not everyone responds. And you can systematically, you can control for how old people are, whether they have children in the household, what part of the country they live from, and different people have very different responses to these. But in general, we're finding these average effects hold. But that's a very good question. And I would say that it's okay for us, and it's okay for me to think about these average effects today, and to sort of highlight the punchline of these general results. Good. I should have said that, so thanks for reminding me.
Let's show our appreciation to Professor Rickard.